We have three people here who are operating in very different ways in the mobility space. We had a great presentation from Helmut. Thank you, Helmut, who's being mobbed like a rock star there. Very different perspectives. So we have a major player, we have a visionary, we have a very exciting startup. So we've got three kind of really interesting perspectives on how mobility is going to be changing in the coming years. Dirk, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. So obviously you're running a huge company with deep expertise in technology and engineering. There's a lot of other stuff happening on the perimeter, though, with startups and innovations. How do you, as a very large organization, manage to kind of keep up with those trends, remain agile, remain flexible? How's that process work? How do you connect the dots as a very large organization?
First of all, we have many innovation projects, but we also created, like more than 2 years ago, what we call A Cube in Silicon Valley,
yep,
where we have our insight into startup economy, but we extended then also with our Airbus venture capitals. We really concentrated on US, Europe, and Israel, and trying to really screen all the relevant startup companies that are directly or indirectly in the future involved in our business models. So we have, of course, also a lot of entrepreneurs inside our company which are actively engaging with different startup communities. Recently, I just witnessed a meeting in Toulouse where we created a project really to cope with the startup scene in Africa, which is really exciting. So we invited 3 companies to join us in Toulouse. We helped them to learn more about the Airbus universe, helped them to develop their business models, and we already found a lot of ideas where we can work in the future together.
Yeah, so there really is kind of like, it's that whole idea of the ecosystem. And Mariano, if I could come to you. So obviously the Hyperloop, incredibly exciting. We all want to ride in one of those pods that you designed. It looks like a lot of fun, and we'll get around much more quickly. Certainly Dirk's journey from Nuremberg this morning was 3.5 hours.
Yeah, today was not so much fun. Normally from Nuremberg to Munich it takes 1.5 hours, and I would have loved either to have Hyperloop or urban air mobility solutions in order to get here, because it took me 3.5 hours to get here to this.
Okay, so we need this Hyperloop to happen, but presumably it's not just about an exciting new innovation, it's about kind of bringing together a lot of disparate sort of different platforms and in creating this whole kind of system that works together in tandem.
So yes, definitely. The Hyperloop is and will always be beautiful, and I absolutely believe that one day we will sit inside of a pod and go from Munich to Berlin in half an hour, as my pitch goes. But it's only a part of the solution. I will always need a different transportation mode to reach the station, right? There will never be a Hyperloop from my door to my friend's door in Berlin. It will always be a station-to-station solution, and to get to the station, we'll always need some type of different mode of transportation. And I think that integrating all of these different modes of transportation is one of the big challenges that we have for the next 10 years, and a few of the things that many people over here at the DLD are working on, which is quite awesome.
So give us an idea how the Hyperloop might integrate with what exists already. What would your vision be for that?
So if we define what exists already as self-driving cars, and when you're talking about Hyperloops, you can assume self-driving cars because they're going to be out there first. There's a very interesting concept from Hyperloop One, which has a self-driving car, a pod that picks you up at home, brings you to the station. That pod integrates into the Hyperloop capsule, travels you to Berlin, and then brings you out to the station at the other end. Has the solution that is a door-to-door solution without ever having to change seats. And the biggest challenge of multimodal transportation is the time that you lose when you're changing transports.
Right.
And that's why I'm a huge fan and a huge believer of all of these modular solutions, a few of which Airbus is also working on.
And presumably the volocopter, which we have over here, it's not going to fly, is it? There's no chance of it flying around the space?
Not this one, not today.
Okay. We'll be part of this larger ecosystem at some point in the future. From a kind of the perspective of an entrepreneur in the mobility space, how will you integrate volocopter, your sort of mobility solution into that larger infrastructure that is being kind of constructed at the moment with autonomous vehicles, etc.?
So we at Volocopter try to go about this as pragmatic as possible. Obviously, starting out as a startup, you can't just come and preach an entirely new way of living, an entirely new, type of infrastructure to be put in place at scale as we would require, going forward in order to actually implement our vision. So we try to go about it very pragmatic, step by step. The way we approached it is, first of all, from a certification basis standpoint, is we tried to make the Volocopter as innovative as it is, to look as conventional as possible for traditional certifiers. We put in a joystick. You can make your entire pilot licensing process, qualify as a German typical pilot, and then fly the Volocopter in a very typical manner. Why did we do that? Because otherwise it would take us forever to convince regulators to put in new regulation.
I see.
Of course, you don't need all these skills to fly a Volocopter. In fact, the Volocopter is so simple to fly, you can put a 5-year-old kid inside and it will intuitively be able to fly it. It's that simple. And even going beyond that, we talked about autonomous, which I think is a huge trend in all of the mobility space. Yes, the Volocopter can be flown fully autonomous, or it can be operated fully autonomous, and we look to get there as quickly as possible, but in a very realistic, let's say, step-by-step approach. Same with infrastructure. From a Volocopter perspective, yes, I envision entire networks of Volo hubs, Volo ports across a whole city, but at the same time, in order to get started, all I need is 2 takeoff and landing spots and the permission to show how much value we can bring to a city in a very safe and efficient manner, and we can already get started. So I think the initial obstacle to get started is extremely minimal, and we have thought very hard not to run into these typical chicken and egg problems that you have when we talk about ubiquitous electric charging infrastructure for the electric mobility space, or for something as infrastructure intensive as, let's say, rail transport and so on. So from a Volocopter perspective, I think all of these challenges are not existent. We have other challenges, but those I think we can very pragmatically circumvent by the way we approach our go-to-market.
Okay, so Dirk, you're now in a position where there are a lot, I think around sort of 250 sort of mobility startups within Europe that are really sort of trying to do exciting things like Volocopter. How does that process work in terms of you working with these kinds of businesses? Are you, did you partner with them? Do you kind of offer them expertise? How do you see that kind of ecosystem developing? Because clearly that will enrich Airbus and also Airbus can enrich those startups.
Yeah, we have several developments. We started in a cube, a startup-like development, which we call Vahana. It's a vertical takeoff lift. It has 8 motors that tilt and go from vertical tilt and then into horizontal flight mode. So this will be fully electric and will be flying first quarter, second quarter this year. We have another more ambitious project with our helicopter colleagues where we look in what we call City Airbus. It's a 4-passenger taxi, fully electric again, 4 motors, and supposed to fly end of the year. This was, again, looking at public safety, looking at, of course, overcoming all the hurdles regarding regulation, and of course, people being scared of this new modality. It will be with a pilot at the beginning, but it will be prepared for full autonomous flight in the future. So these are 2 examples where we look in own examples of autonomous flying for the future.
Sure. And Florian mentioned regulation. Clearly that's a huge issue when it comes to mobility, even if a 5-year-old could fly that, which I have to say I'd like to see. Not that I'm doubting it, but I think it would just be very entertaining. Is that an area where presumably you're talking to Brussels, you're talking to national governments? How do we move forward with that? Because that seems to be one of the big issues that multimodal transport and mobility solutions are going to face is this acceptance of their safety and the opportunity that's there.
Yeah, today this is still our biggest barrier because it doesn't unleash the full potential till you get certainty for investment. Today we don't know about the speed of regulation, and this really hinders us in accelerating these kind of business models. Yeah. It is also very difficult discussions looking at how to certify in the future. I give you an anecdote. Last year we were introducing our civil drone business, which we call Airbus Aerial. And I had a discussion with a very high government official responsible for certification. And I asked them, so what are the plans regarding regulation? Because if we now have thousands and millions of last-mile cargo drone deliveries coming into the city, how are you going to do air traffic management? What is your idea about centralizing it? What kind of technologies you want to adapt? And he was looking at me like, no, we don't plan that. I don't believe that we will have a density that it's worthwhile to do so. And I asked him, so what is your idea? So we license the pilot, and the pilot is responsible to control the vehicle. And I said, so what is happening if a vehicle falls down, hits a kid, then we will rethink our strategy.
Okay.
Okay, so there's still a long way to go. We have to accelerate. The problem is, especially in Europe, for us, it will be decisive. Will we look at a European policy, or will we look at 28/27 different policy-making processes, which will, of course, then do what we don't want, force us to go to bigger markets where we can have one policy rule in order to scale faster.
Sure.
So it will be a lot about policy making, speed of policy making, of course, while respecting safety and ensuring that the new technology is introduced in a safe mode.
And I guess this is for Mariana and for you, Florian. What Doug was sort of suggesting in terms around regulation, in terms of kind of governmental attitudes, does that mean in some ways that while Europe has, you know, especially Germany, deep expertise in this technology and this kind of engineering, that there are other nations, notably, you know, in Dubai and Singapore, where there's a little bit more experimentation going on, so things, that's an opportunity for you with your kind of like your new visions that are maybe slightly more challenging to experiment more and to partner in those kinds of places?
So regulation is definitely one of the biggest challenges of the Hyperloop. Everybody that I will always try to sell the Hyperloop to comes and compares it to the Transrapid, and the Transrapid failed because the magnetic levitation was complicated. It's like, yeah, the technology side we've got handled. The problem is the regulation, and that doesn't get handled from today to tomorrow. And of course, in some environments, it's much harder than in other ones. But on the other hand, there are reasons why this is hard, right? There's a safety reason that you will always have with hardware, which is something that the people from Silicon Valley, for instance, and all their software engineers don't have that much experience as so many of the automobile and big mobility players over here have. And those are things that in Europe, and especially like this consortium of the European Union, right? It's a very big thing to be able to have all of these people talking in the same place. There was one example, the European Union had a goal of having any two places inside of Europe connected to each other in 4 hours. So if I am in the middle of nowhere in Bavaria and I want to go to the middle of nowhere in south of France, I need to be able to reach that place in 4 hours. And of course, yeah, fly, take a Hyperloop, easy solutions. But again, the bottleneck to that is the time in the airport, for instance, or the time to reach those fast modes of transportation. Those are a few of the bottlenecks that you need to handle, which again bring us back to the point of having everybody try to speak the same language.
Well, the 4-hour thing sounds great, but it was 3.5 hours from Nuremberg this morning.
Yeah,
so
getting there, but from Nuremberg, not from France.
There's some work to be done.
150.
Way to go, way to go. I want to comment on the certification thing because for us, you know, coming from a small town in Germany, we're from Karlsruhe, you know, I always keep joking, we didn't build the Volocopter to solve the mobility problems in Karlsruhe. You can come up with, you know, different solutions for that. This really is, as is very typical in Germany, it's a high-tech company looking for a demand in a global market. What does that mean from a certification standpoint? Wherever the regulator is willing to open up his regulation for us to demonstrate the viability of the technology to be applied, we go. So therefore, it would help if we could do it at home, and I think it would be to the benefit of Europe and to the economy of Europe if we were to stay here and to be able to demonstrate it here first. But if we're not, we're just very pragmatic and go wherever that happens first. In our case, there is a reason why Dubai and Singapore are at the forefront of this development, simply because there, whoever is ruling the city pretty much has the authority over his airspace. That is not particularly the case of the mayor of Munich or the mayor of Paris, being able to decide what he wants to implement in his lower level airspace. So therefore we see much more traction there, and I would expect those cities to be at the forefront of implementing these technologies. At the same time, once we have demonstrated the viability of these kind of services in one city, and I think that's true also for Hyperloop, you need a viable demonstration case. And once you can show that, others will want to follow, and other cities will build up that pressure on their certification environment to actually also implement the changes. And last comment, of course, you cannot compromise on safety. We're not just going to go start out in any country. Dubai sometimes gets that reputation, but that is not true from our experience. The safety standards there are at absolute international levels. No one today, in today's world, can afford to implement a mobility service that is not absolutely safe.
Okay, so let's maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about the built-in environment. Clearly some of the mobility solutions, maybe Dirk, if you could come to this first, clearly some of the mobility solutions that we're looking at are going to mean that our cities are going to change in the next few years. How do you see some of the technologies that Airbus is working on sort of changing the built environment over the next sort of 10, 20 years onwards?
No, one big topic will be hybrid and full electric flying. If we can, we tested it. We have a cooperation with Siemens, and we just joined Rolls-Royce into it, where we look into full electric flying of commercial aircrafts. So the first step will be a 20-seater, but of course then the next steps will be 100, and ultimate goal has to be a 200-seater, the single aisle. So if we can have a full electric flight, this, of course, gives complete new opportunities in order to go into city centers, also extend the time slots for landing and starting, because you don't want to have the noise and the pollution coming into the city at night. So this gives us complete new ways of connecting cities in a much more efficient mode, also using, of course, night for flight. Is it possible? Yes. Demonstrations was done. We've had 1- and 2-seaters, but now it's we had really. That's why also Rolls-Royce came into the cooperation. We have to accelerate the development. First will be hybrid, but second step will be full electric flight.
Sure, and the main challenge technologically in order to get there, we were discussing earlier, is battery technology and how quickly that can advance.
This is the biggest challenge. The power density today is still not what we need, but we believe that the years to come, also driven by the car manufacturers, we will see a very much faster development of the power density, which enables us, hopefully, then to accelerate the hybrid and the full electric flight development for aerospace.
Okay, Mariana, obviously the Hyperloop is a solution that could move between cities, but presumably within cities as well. How do you know it's between cities? No.
So between cities, there's like this range, this distance range where the Hyperloop makes sense. We like to estimate that it's somewhere between 100 to 1,000 kilometers. Somewhere that range is like the Hyperloop.
Very large cities like Sao Paulo.
So let's say São Paulo. São Paulo doesn't have an inner city range of 100 kilometers. The city is chaotic enough as it is. But okay, I'm originally from São Paulo, and I don't think I will ever get a Hyperloop from Munich to São Paulo crossing the Atlantic. I do think an airplane will continue to be the best mode of transportation for that for a rather long time. But going back to the example of São Paulo, half an hour away from São Paulo with a car, half an hour car away from São Paulo, there's this city called Santos, which is a very quiet and calm city with a beach view. Compare that to São Paulo and its huge noise and traffic and pollution and chaos. And if I were to build a Hyperloop between those cities, and I could reach Santos in 10 minutes, the population of São Paulo would go like this. Nobody would live in São Paulo if they could be 10 minutes away in the beach. quality of life isn't the best. I mean, I love my city. I really love São Paulo, but quality of life isn't the best thing over there.
Right.
Opportunities are, and for that you need to be close to the city. But if I can have a beach view across my window, I might prefer going to sleep looking at that every night.
So let's dig into this a little bit, and maybe Florian, you could pick this up. Are we talking about, solutions like the volocopter? Does that mean that our notion of geography will change a little bit? So, people won't feel like they have to be kind of close to the city center of Munich, that they'll be able to live somewhere in Bavaria, and sort of Bavaria becomes this larger metropolitan kind of area.
It absolutely does have an impact on the way that we look at how do we go about our everyday lives, what are the resulting consequences for the structures of our settlements. If you look historically, the mobility needs, more than that, but mobility needs I think are one factor that have influenced the way that we are building our cities and settlements, and that we've done that in the past. And now with these new technologies and mobility solutions at hand, I think we will have to think very hard on what are the consequences of that on, for example, a city like Munich. If it suddenly gets not crowded to get from Tegernsee to Munich city center in the morning, everybody would want to live there. You gave the example of Santos, in Sao Paulo. Not everybody might be as familiar with that, but I think we really have to think hard as a society. How do we want to use these kind of technologies, and what are the effects that may have? I personally live in Heidelberg. It's the same. You can live, in the hills behind the Neckar Valley suddenly and be at the city center within 10 minutes. That is very, very attractive. Now, do we want everybody to just disperse across the landscape? What kind of negative side effects might that have? So I think there are things that we need to consider early on what the resulting consequences will be.
Sure. Did you want to come back on that, Marianne?
Yes. So one interesting thing that I like, one of the most constant trends that we have in the last few years is that cities are getting bigger and bigger, right? Urbanization is a trend that will not stop so soon. But we were talking earlier, what if we stopped having these huge cities, and when I say huge, Munich isn't even that huge, I'm talking about London, São Paulo, New York, Beijing. What instead of having those huge cities, maybe like we were talking about having more widespread dynamics. What does it do to the economy of all these smaller cities, such as Tegernsee, such as Santos, such as all the smaller regions around the UK, and if everything is not centralized in this one place?
Yeah. Well, I mean, dispersing kind of economic opportunity is clearly something that has been a challenge, certainly in the UK, for a long time. I think maybe it would be interesting now to sort of start talking about like the human aspect of this, and maybe Dirk, you could pick this up. Do you think in terms of how we're going to make progress in the coming years, it's as much about kind of like a mindset, a shift in mindset, and a shift in kind of behavioral aspects of human beings, as much as the technology being put into practice?
No, I believe we're in the midst of a huge transformation process. Digitalization is, of course, a major driver for it. And we can see that a lot of our people, at least in our company, are scared of the speed of transformation.
Yeah.
And this is something we have to cope, because culture change has to go along, and we have to cope also in order to make people comfortable with that change. It will be easier for the next generation, and we can see, of course, there's a generation shift towards Generation Z, for example, where you will see they adapt much faster, and for them it's a natural process. So it's like we grew up with LPs, audio cassettes, CDs. We owned them, we put them in a shelf, we liked it to put it out, to take it out and to have a look at it. My kids use Netflix, Spotify. They have no interest in owning any kind of CD. The same will happen, of course, for transport. They want to have access to transportation. They want to be fast in going from A to B. Will they really be driving for owning a car? Very doubtful in a few years, especially if they live in a city. And looking at the transformation process, you just mentioned urbanization, 2007 marked the first time that we had more people in cities than in rural areas. We expect 2030 to have 2/3 of the world population in cities. These problems are just starting. Traffic congestion is a huge burn of GDP growth. So we have to cope and come up with better modalities, but it has to be also a process where we take care of the people, making them understand it's for the benefit, and that also there's a role to play for people that believe they have to learn software in order to have a job in the future. So my people right now, we really explain a lot about this transformation process. We have a lot of people focusing on hardware, and this is also something we'll do in the future because we need hardware. What is so unique about this hardware? It creates unique data. And this is now creating new business models because we add digital platforms in order to use the digital data in order to create new service for our customers.
Yeah.
So this, for the moment, it's complementary. So we add skills, we add new jobs, and both are definitely closely depending on each other.
Okay. Greg, if I may comment on this, because you set out with the question and asking, what are the implications on us as a society, and what does it mean for everyone individually? And we have this amazing technological point in time where there's so much happening at the same time. Many people get scared and they're like, okay, what's going to happen in the next few years? And the transformation is just accelerating at a rapid pace. And that's why I like the motto of this year's conference so much. Reconquer, as a society, let's get on top of handling our own destiny and decide what we want to do with that technology. With Volocopter, I think we are pioneers in a particular space, representative for many spaces that are being transformed right now. And we tend to look at ourselves as victims of what is happening by some, invisible force somewhere out there. If we in Germany, we are at the forefront of all of these, or many of these technological developments. If we feel we are victims, what shall people in many other parts of the world say to that? I think we need to find ways on how to shape these technologies in a form that we embrace them and we look forward to applying these kind of technologies. And I think this is something where we're not spending enough time on, and this is why we also, I fully accept the fact that this has this offers fascinating opportunities, but some people don't like the idea of having flying taxis, across the city, and I accept that. And we need to indulge in a discussion around it, and that's the reason why we should, participate as an industry, as an emerging industry, participate in forums like that to get this, more societal and political discussion going at the sideline of the technology development that's happening.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, right.
What you said, some people may not like the idea of having flying taxis all around, and sure, I accept that. The one thing that I don't accept is if those people also have a problem in sharing a car, if those people also have a problem in taking a bus, if those people also have a problem with doing anything else other than sitting alone in their car on their way to work. And that is the mindset change that really needs to happen. In Germany today, on the average German rush hour in the morning when people go to work, there are only 1.1 people per car. That translates to 70% of the physical space being literally thrown away. And then people complain about traffic.
I accept that. I accept that. This is where it gets interesting. I have a different approach to it, because as nonsense as this may be, and I know the facts, I don't think preaching something else will do the job. Preaching something that may make sense, I don't think is scalable and will not work in the way that I see us humans, actually working. So what I believe is the solution is we need to find attractive technological solutions that the people will want to use that make ecological, economical, and societal sense. And therefore, we are building a two-seater, and we're trying to do that and build it and operate it in an as sustainable way as possible, because I don't believe that people will be meeting at some meeting spot and use a Volocopter with 10 people at a time. As much sense as that may make, today no one is riding the tube. Everybody is sitting on his own car, in traffic jam over Bay Bridge every morning for hours just to get to work. That's human nature, and I think we have to accept it and try to find better solutions to offer to them.
Okay, so Dirk, you wanted to come in.
No, I just say it's human nature to be scared. The problem is, by being scared, we underestimate the speed of change. And this has happened in our whole history. Looking at the introduction of cars, Wilhelm II said, this is only a phenomena, I believe in horses. When the first locomotive was built and put into service, there were large communities that wanted to build fences to protect people to go close because they thought they will get brain damage by the speed of the locomotive passing by, and the speed was 25 kilometers per hour. They also had what they called the Red Flag Act in I think it was the UK. It was what the original name was Highway Locomotive Act, where they had a rule that in order to drive a car, a locomotive, there needed to be 3 people on board and 1 person in front of the car with a red flag, making sure that they are not scaring people. And that was a speed of, I think, in towns of 2 miles an hour. Okay, so if we look at that and look at urban air mobility, if we predict it based on what we have seen, it will be much faster than we think right now, and it will come. Yeah. It cannot be stopped. And the better we embrace it, the better it will be for the people and for the transformation process.
There are many people who voted Brexit who would like to return to those days with the red flag flying in front of cars and that kind of level of progress. Let's talk a little bit about sort of like the changes in mobility now in terms of the idea of some of these solutions that we're discussing acting almost as kind of platforms. I don't know who wants to pick this up. Maybe Dirk, you could kick off. So clearly, if there are autonomous solutions, suddenly that space where we are, maybe commuting for 20 minutes, half an hour every day, that becomes a very different thing. We're not plugged into sort of having to kind of, navigate. The car's going to do that autonomously. How do you see that space kind of developing over time? Is it going to be somewhere where we can sell services, or how do you maybe envision that change?
No, I think it will create a lot of new businesses. It's not only about the hardware, it's a complete ecosystem. But not only the directly involved, but it will create a lot of impact for other businesses around, for shops being accessible. It will create new ideas, because looking just at Munich, you have 12% of the surface covered by parking spaces. Imagine what we could do, creating a green city, using it for new ideas about creating social life on the streets again, and bringing people together. So there are a lot of options where you can change society, looking in the future where life will change if you can get rid of parking spaces. Just by, not only by getting rid of the cars, but just by increasing the use of cars. Today, cars are used around 13–40% of the capacity, which is ridiculous. The same is, of course, valid also for helicopters. So that's why we, for example, introduced, and that's currently introducing a platform called Voom in order to increase the usage of helicopters, making sure that the capacity is better used. So there are a lot of ideas where we can be more efficient, making sure that our resources are used in a much more responsible manner.
Okay. Marianne, how do you see the Hyperloop fitting into that kind of ecosystem on a broader level?
I think the Hyperloop is one more player in the platform. I think it goes back to a few of the things we already mentioned earlier. The Hyperloop will always need a car to get there, will always need an airplane to cross the Atlantic, will always need... it does go a few of the helicopter cases, so the Hyperloop and the helicopter do sort of go for similar ranges. But still, if you think about like the future of transportation, right, the buzz we all like to talk about, for me, the true future of transportation is a lot about data and a lot about combining all of these different mobility providers. There will always be 1,000 mobility providers, and that's something good. And they all have their own use cases, and they are all good in their specific range, in their specific use case, in their specific mission. But you need to somehow have a platform where all these people can share their data, can provide their services, and where the user can look up and say, what if I want to go to Berlin tomorrow and I want to take the mode of transportation that is best for the environment? What if anyone would ever think like that? I wouldn't even know which one of them it is. So if maybe we have a platform that analyzes all of those data, where people can provide that and compare those things, then we're going to a very interesting future.
Okay. So, Florian, you talked just now about the fact that the way to win the argument against the people who are maybe having kind of concerns about the kind of the change in mobility is to just provide better services, better solutions for them. We're so used now to personalization with our on-demand culture. Do you think the kind of personalization is going to be a big motivator in that sort of persuasion, that people want things to work for their lifestyles, to work in ways that are convenient to them, rather than walking to a bus stop or walking to a train station and queuing up and, you know, in my case, waiting for 4 tube trains to pass by before I can actually get on one to get me into the office. How does that personalization idea?
So I'm absolute with Mariana on that one. I don't necessarily see one platform, but there will be any kind of transportation option will have to be fully transparent and integrated, to some degree accessible to the customer. I imagine a future where in the morning I get up, I know I need, today I have a specific transportation need, and I choose my options depending on the time I have, the money I'm willing to spend, the weather conditions, and so on. And based on that, I will get different options depending on my route. It may include a traditional car, it may include a Hyperloop, it may include a volocopter on some days, on some others it might not. So I think we will offer personal mobility services intermodally integrated to people across the world. I think that is a very transparent next step in how I see this. The personalization, I believe, will play out very strongly in the digital content that I, as a user of a transportation service, expect in my environment. So no matter whether I'm sitting in a volocopter, I'm sitting in a Hyperloop, or in a self-driving car, I expect to have my own content, my own playlist, my own contacts to my family and so on, to be available at that point in time. So I think connectivity and entertainment will play a very important role in all of this in order to come to the levels that people absolutely get used to nowadays. I mean, Dirk talked about his kids. They would want to use all of these services no matter what kind of transportation mode they use. And we fully embrace that and prepare for that, for the volocopter to seamlessly integrate in all of that.
Okay, I've just noticed to my horror that we're out of time. So I think everyone in this room is really looking forward to using all the kind of multimodal forms of transport that the three of you are innovating around. So thank you for your time, great discussion, and looking forward to seeing what you do in the future. Thank you.